All right, Jazz Cabbage, Rick Thompson, Jim Salame, and Anton Harb starting the show out with us. Have to kind of call an audible. Some stuff I had lined up didn't really work out. That happens sometimes, but we'll be okay. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of good information out there, and we are going to have some guests coming up that we will talk about in a second. But I think I forgot last week to highlight our awesome sponsors. And there's an issue here with the sound. There was last time. I haven't addressed it. Let's see what happens again. But this will accomplish, nonetheless, giving some tribute to our great sponsors. So let's start off with that.
Jazz Cabbage Cafe is sponsored by The Botanical Company, Redemption Cannabis, Rio Leaf Solutions, The Detroit Nutrient Company, GrowGreenMI.com, and Custom 420 promos featuring Culture Clothing.
Not bad. It was a little loud, but that worked out pretty good. Good job again, Rick.
Sounded good.
Sounded
great.
That was great.
Fuck those assholes. Fuck.
We do have great
The newest hit
sponsors.
song.
They're all taking us through this year. We might be joined by another one or two, but we're certainly fine with what we got going on and continue to do our job as a result of it. So appreciate that.
All those sponsors are wonderful people. I was just singing a song Jim and Salame and I were composing in the green room.
Yeah.
He fucked those asshole songs.
It's a lot of swearing. It's a lot more swearing in that song than any
But
song.
that's what the kids like nowadays, right? That's what the kids like.
Check it out. Joining us early on today, Josey Scoggin.
What's up, Josey?
House. We're gonna have her weigh in on whatever she's gonna smoke a joint. It's unusual for her.
I'm gonna smoke 3 joints.
Yeah.
Well,
At the
Josie's
same
no
time.
stranger to the
that's more
swearing
usual.
either. So
talk a little bit about of course, while Josie's here, and Sons and Daughters and all the other great things and great work she and her group does for other people. But he's also very aware of all this stuff that we're talking about, and will join us here as join in on the discussion. So where to even begin? We're gonna later on today, and it doesn't have to be before Rob Tuttle comes on, but we're going to talk about his case, famously intertwined with the Hartwick case, oftentimes known as Hartwick Tuttle, in which the Supreme Court decided to take advantage of these cases and rule on what exactly is necessary to meet conditions to utilize the Section 4 immunity of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act and or the Section 8 affirmative defense. And it was a little bit more complicated than that, but that's basically what they decided to use those cases as a basis for. And Rob Tuttle, who was the defendant in these cases, is going to come on and join us today. And we can talk a little bit about the implications of the rulings and stuff, even before he's on here. But I want to mention a few things about him when he comes on, because he deserves a little bit of highlighting and tribute from us. He's been through a lot, and a few old cases are kind of coming to light as we discuss some of the issues that are taking place with in the legislature and some of the changes that are attempted to be made, and why some things happen, and some historical perspective in the mix, I think, is always good. I got to speak with Amy and Latrish today, who went to Lansing, and the committee hearing that they went to attend was canceled, and there's going to be some moves of bills to the judiciary. And a couple of us were on a call this morning with Representative Whitwer's office discussing House Bill 5512, which is one of the ones that Amy and Latricia ended up being able to discuss with some lawmakers today. And we have a pretty consistent message. We talked about it here last week, but that's yet another bill contemplating changing amending the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act that was done without any consultation with the relevant stakeholders and the advocacy activism, other industry associations. By the way, the MICIA does oppose this bill, doesn't just not support it, it actually opposes it again. I mean, this is really bad because this is like a small group of people with a lot of influence just pushing this shit through.
we really should explain to our viewers what 5512 is. 5512 is a House bill that would propose to change the drug courts to Currently, we have a case in Michigan, People v. Tui, which allows people to use cannabis if they're medically certified on parole or probation, and that's been applied to drug courts. I spoke to Attorney Thomas Levine last night, who said absolutely that they've been successfully challenging drug court refusals and winning on getting people to use cannabis. This particular bill would give drug court judges the option to not let a registered medical marijuana patient use cannabis, and it also decides, seemingly arbitrarily, what is considered to be a serious enough illness to be able to justify using cannabis while under the drug court rules and what is not. So we're really opposed to it because we don't think judges should be making medical decisions. Plus the People v. Tui case, basically we won that, which says you can no longer worry about this stuff. Just let people use their medicine. Jamie?
Is there a standard to what they can, like, when the
No.
judge uses? Okay. Hold on.
No, because that's
That's a stupid question. It would be
With
like just and cool and not in
Well,
Michigan.
within the bill itself, it does articulate which conditions qualify as serious. It doesn't actually, it doesn't leave it up to the judges all the way, but I mean,
What
it
is
does.
that?
But chronic pain isn't on the list, and that constitutes.
Right, chronic pain is 90% of patients,
Yeah.
or at least it was at one
So
point.
it runs into the issues that Rick said. It also runs into what I started explaining about there not being consultation with all the people who would have meaningful input. If there were, we'd be able to describe this kind of thing earlier on. It also keeps the mindset that cannabis is on the same list with the dangerous substances that the drug courts need to work with. Whereas we are saying on here, we've been very clear this year in a couple of really nice shows about how it can actually reduce the harm from dangerous substances. And that should be maybe even considered in the drug courts thing. But some people actually consider the results of the Tui case and how it lends itself to the drug court to be unintended consequences, where it's clearly how it should be. If you've gone through the process, seeing the doctor, getting the recommendation letter, submitting it to the state, having it reviewed with an application, approved, put into the registry, sent a card, you're a medical marijuana patient. That's it. If you're a medical marijuana patient, whether you're in drug court or regular court, you continue to use your medicine. You're deciding to mess with somebody's healthcare based on some bias that makes no real medical sense. And
Part of the drug court,
we have that.
part of the drug court rules has typically been not only are you not allowed to use cannabis, but you're not allowed to associate with people that are cannabis users or be around cannabis itself. That's part of what drug court wants you to do, to stay away from all those substances. But now we have 36,000 people employed in the Michigan cannabis industry, just under 5 regulated marketplaces, according to Director Brisboe. How can you tell 36,000 people they can't work at their job because drug court says you can't be around cannabis or people that use it? So really, this is a 1990s kind of law, Jamie. It's just wrong.
It's got to come off the list, and that's also what we're working on. Of course, within the state and federally, of course, would be the ideal. But certainly within the state, there's too much conflict for it to remain there, and it causes too many problems.
Jamie, or I'm sorry, Josey.
I would be interested in knowing what the chronic conditions are, right? Because I'm a wheelchair user. I'm visibly disabled. I am a chronic pain patient. I don't have rheumatoid arthritis. I don't have spinal, like whatever. So I don't have a named condition. I have a condition that 3 other people.
So we should pull it up and read it. We can.
Really perfect.
And we can do that. Yeah.
Not that I have much experience myself within the courtroom. I suppose that's fair. But this idea that people with disabilities just don't get prosecuted for crimes is wrong. All right. And I think most famously, I'll just like throw out Renee Wolf and her phenomenal activist in a wheelchair, has MS. Cops send an undercover informant, also in a motherfucking wheelchair, to her house to buy a quarter of weed, which she sold him for $10, and then arrested her. And that lasted, their jail time lasted all of like 6 hours before they realized like they have to wipe her ass and shit, right? Like the jail system is not built for people with disabilities to be in it, but more so, this idea that we have that people that are disabled don't go through the system is wrong. Now, the idea that the system isn't built for us to exist in it is true. Most things aren't. But that's what's so interesting about people with cannabis charges. What we're seeing a lot is expungements is people who were self-medicating prior to, I don't know if people think in like 2009, all of a sudden people got sick and could use cannabis, but people were doing this already. And people with disabilities make up a good portion of people who have been incarcerated or arrested for marijuana.
At what point does it end too? I mean, if we start giving the courts the authority, think about upcoming technologies, ketamine, the MDMA, all these cool substances that are now being used to treat the problems that are landing a lot of these folks into prison. You know, is that going to open up the door to have those types of therapies taken away from folks if they end up in drug court? I think we're allowing stigma to rear its head into something that truly is a medical issue, and it translates differently when the courts get involved, because while the judges need to follow the letter of the law, there's always a right or a left spin. It's never truly unbiased, no matter how hard they try.
Jim, did you want to get in on this one?
I just wanted to say, you know, with all this stuff, whether it be cannabis or ketamine or MDMA or whatever you're talking about, it's all, I just feel like we just need some action, either state level or federal level, to just make it all legal. That's what everyone's been talking about for a while. And that would really solve a lot of issues and make it more of a health issue than a criminal issue. We've talked about that a lot. And in the state of Michigan, I'm wondering if just the rescheduling wouldn't just take care of that too. 5512 would specifically just render that null and void. Is that what you guys are saying?
Well, I want to point out that drug court oftentimes prohibits people from using alcohol, which is not on a Schedule 1. So just because it's removed from Schedule 1, I'm not exactly sure that would automatically, prevent judges from saying you can't use cannabis. Sure. Although it would be a huge step in the right direction. It would certainly be a gigantic guiding sign to the legal industry that says, stop treading on me.
Yeah.
So in this case, it specifically creates a reconciliation between the 1961 Act that addresses the drug courts, and then resolves it in favor of the 61 Act instead of in the subsequent newer Michigan Medical Marijuana Act.
So the reason that's important, though, the newer Medical Marijuana Act from 2008 is a voter-directed initiative, which means it takes precedence over all the other laws. So even though the drug court operates under, Jamie mentioned the 61 law, that used to be the way things were until 2008 when our petition drive was successful. Not mine. I wasn't involved in that. I don't want to take credit for something I didn't do, but when the petition drive hit. So that's the real concern, is that we're using the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act to supersede drug court law. We think, bueno. That's what it's supposed to do. The judges say no bueno. They don't like it.
So they think it's an unintended consequence that they can't, screw people over for cannabis still. Somebody must have thought about that. So Paul Young's attorney repealed the Controlled Substance Act of 72. In Michigan, the most recent version, I think, is 78. He might be meaning federal, but Michigan it's 78. Could be the same thing though. Exactly. And he's exactly correct, of course.
And that's one of the concerns we have, is when you start trying to have modern day law supersede a voter directed initiative, you completely destroy the purpose of having that 3/4 supermajority vote requirement. It's much, much more difficult, viewers, for you to change the language of a voter directed initiative. You need to have a 3/4 vote in the House and in the Senate, whereas in a regular bill, you just need 51% in the House and Senate. So it's much more difficult to change that. People would like to have, their little way around that superseding voter-directed citizens initiative petition.
Will of the people doesn't mean what it did back in the day, unfortunately. It seems like policy is shifting and people are still holding on to the very end. They just won't give up. Yeah. And it's going to take a lot of these folks just having to retire. I mean, it's a generational issue.
Attrition.
It's attrition, yeah. And until we through attrition get rid of those types of perspectives that have been around for the past 40, 50 years, some of them on the bench. I mean, hopefully at some point the younger blood will get into the system and we can start making some changes. But as long as there's legislation like this going around, there's always going to be loopholes that folks are trying to create. It's not going to stop.
Jamie's got on the agenda today a discussion about a recent Supreme Court decision that helped ballot petitioners more more effectively do their job. And that's exactly what we've been talking about here. A bunch of people didn't like the law the way that it was passed, so they decided they wanted to change it to make it much, much more hard for us to duplicate what decriminalized nature has done, what MI legalized has done, the different successful things that we've had in the past.
Yeah, and there was really stupid, some of those things from 2018, those changes, and the League of Women Voters were able to challenge that and eventually get some of those things taken care of. We still didn't take care of the 180 days thing yet. That's I don't know if that case is still alive. Remember the
I do.
Luann Cosmos, or I can't think of her name right now, with the fracking bill, challenging that part of it. There is a statute that says it's got to be 180 days, but they never changed the state constitution, which implies that there's a 4-year period to collect signatures, and that question wasn't answered in this case. But a lot of the other stupid shit was.
The reason we're talking about this is because during the MI Legalized 2016 campaign, we collected more than 300,000 signatures. Only about 200 and a little bit of change was necessary in order to successfully meet it. But we didn't accomplish that within a 6-month period, within 180 days. And a rule was dropped on our ass that said if you don't collect those signatures within 180 days, then your petition drive didn't successfully accomplish its purpose. Although, as Jamie mentioned, we're supposed to have a 4-year period. So there's been some challenge to that interpretation, and that may still be going on or not, but it's a tough thing to do, to collect 225,000 signatures, valid signatures, within a 6-month period, people.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the ballot initiative is very Michigan. It's Michigan oriented. And I think we need to preserve that as the best we can. That's how you see a lot of the states coming online now with legislator passed cannabis laws. And I think that the fact Michigan's was passed by the people overwhelmingly, it just speaks to what the power that it could have. And if it gets watered down, I don't know. I think they're almost unique to Michigan in certain ways, just how some of our laws have been passed. And I don't know. I think it's
2018 was the very first year, and I believe it was Vermont, very first year where a legislature actually approved a medical marijuana law. Everything up until that point had been through the ballot initiative process. And I believe someone will have to correct me on this. It's like 12 or 13 states in the United States, maybe up to 18, that actually have the petitioning process. Not every state affords their citizens the way to put things on the ballot the way that we do here in Michigan. So most of those original states that did this, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, California for sure, all did it through the ballot proposal process, through the sweat and the toil of the citizenry in order to get laws right sized for them.
The lawmakers don't like it when you circumvent them and make them have to deal with a law that they didn't put into place. And seen that, from this perspective, at least since 2008.
One of the problems that we have is here in Michigan, every bit of the law that you propose has to be printed on a sheet of paper that you collect a signature on. Ours was a little lengthy because it's a big issue. So we actually had a piece that had a flappy fold over piece. But you're limited in how many words you can put on there because you can only make it so small. People still have to be able to read it. So when we pass a proposal through a ballot petitioning process, it's not a full-fledged legal thing like you would have if it came through the House and the Senate, where dozens and dozens of attorneys spent months crafting language that exactly covered every possible circumstance. So when we produce something like that, it's skeletal by nature. Has to be, because we have a restriction on how many words we can use. So oftentimes lawmakers don't like it that we pass laws that have our best intention, and then they're left to interpret what we meant to say, and oftentimes they don't interpret it correctly. And that's part of what the Tuttle Hartwick decision is about, Jamie, right? Not interpreting the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act correctly.
Oh my God, what the fuck? That was the worst decision I've ever seen.
With the exception that, some of it was okay, but it defined what was not defined and what had been tried in many different forms and arguments throughout the various districts throughout the state. So in part, the Supreme Court felt as though it had to define what you actually need to do to prove Section 4, what you actually need to do to prove Section 8. Now, all of the things that they decided were very good. So go ahead, Josey.
Well, can you tell me if before this we knew that a brownie was the entire weight and that would count as your stuff? Did anyone know that? Did anyone know or have an idea that concentrates were illegal? Or was this something, because I was 19, right? So for me, it was like, what the fuck? And I would read sorry, I don't, Jamie was like, please don't say fuck on my show.
No, I didn't.
Jimmy did not.
Say
We started off singing the "Fuck Those Assholes" song.
And you read it, and it says, any the stalks and seeds, or any mixture thereof, or any compound thereof, or whatever the hell it was. It seems so clear.
Now, are you getting into Carruthers here a little bit?
The Carruthers,
Yeah, I
right?
think so.
This was my
Yeah,
first experience of this, like this idea, which happened just prior to Tuttle, right?
Yeah,
And then when
versus
Tuttle came
Carruthers,
out,
which
and
made
it was
so
the way
only-
that they were weighing it.
So
That was
only
so
so just real quick, Josey, Carruthers only made the ruling implied only flower and leaf could be considered usable marijuana. So concentrates and anything and infused products and anything else were now legally questionable. Go ahead.
So after that, I was like, wait a minute, the court's stupid, right? Like this is dangerous. I'm really scared. Like we're all gonna go. All my friends are in jail right now. Like Ryan Basler had just been like fucking raided by the United States military. It was like a really crazy, scary climate. So when this decision came out, I think it changed a lot of things for us, right? So the idea that I don't know. So what else was connected to that? The Tuttle decision as well, right?
Yeah, Hartwick, Tuttle.
Hartwick and Tuttle.
So they all were. There were like 9 or 10 of these things that just really radically altered how we look at it and made
In the
decision.
same period of time, right? Over the same
If you talk about a 2-year period, we really
Right.
had a really bad 2-year period when Bill Schuette was Attorney General. He got elected in 10 and was appointed in 11. Immediately, they raided Big Daddies. They raided our stuff right away. But if you look at from maybe 12 to 14, or maybe 12 and a half to 14 and a half, those 2-year periods, it sucked being a cannabis user in Michigan because the rules were constantly changing. Concentrates were okay. Then concentrates weren't okay. You were okay to have cannabis in your car when you drive. Then all of a sudden you have to have it in a fucking lockbox, and then there's the difference between if you're a registered patient, you can sort of have THC in your system. But if you're not a registered patient, you absolutely cannot have THC in your system. So we really underwent a lot of rigmarole, primarily through the Court of Appeals. Because, Jamie, it's true that although a couple of these cases did come from the Supreme Court, most of the negativity that we saw during that time period was delivered by the appellate court. I think it's fair to say.
Quite a bit of. We didn't get any good ruling until I think it was called Green, where it implied that you could have I think it implied a patient-to-patient transfer. The only time. And it lasted a very short time because directly after the McQueen and everything was
the McQueen decision.
Yeah.
The McQueen decision had,
That was a weird place. They had like lockers and stuff. I mean, whatever. It was not a criminal case. It was a civil case. So
it was a civil case, but it was used as the basis for many future paramilitary raids and criminal charges.
No,
go ahead.
Rob paid for his own defense and he dragged that shit out for ever, right? So I had my kid by the time that he started his sentencing. And if he would have just taken a plea deal and been done, we could expunge his record today, right? It could be over.
So she's talking about our guest coming on today, and I wanted to highlight that when he comes on because he did decide to take on the system himself.
And he paid for it. He paid an outrageous
He didn't get the
amount of money.
ACLU. He didn't get a cannabis attorney to say, okay, we'll do it for a discounted rate or expenses. He didn't get any of that. He paid full on for a really good attorney.
And he tried really hard. And if that would have went our way, it would have really changed. I mean, there is a lot at stake. We saw it. And for a long time, it's just gotten worse also. I mean, you guys had that is it Judith and
Judith Pontius and
oh my God. There's a case in Coldwater now with another 70-year-old woman who has a bunch of clones, and she's now a criminal because of all of her clones and her pot brownies that weigh pounds and pounds, but it's crazy.
I got a call today about some enforcement in Warren based on their overly restrictive ordinance and a discussion as to whether or not it should be challenged. My opinion, of course, was, fuck those guys. They can't get away with this stuff. And it was based upon a complaint from a nearby person, a neighbor or somebody nearby, and said, hey, they're growing over there. The 12 plants that they allow. And I guess the police came by and said, okay, you got to shut that down and we're going to inspect. So I think the first thing you're saying is fuck your inspection. You've got no probable cause to come in here. Somebody's fucking saying something doesn't mean anything. And even what they said doesn't imply that anything illegal was taking place. So that kind of stuff's got to get nipped in the bud. They can't do that shit.
What came of that? Is it,
This is today, man. They're going to tell them that they can't
piss off. Yeah, you got to warn.
If you keep on enforcing this, we're going to challenge it and tell you to fuck off.
This is still the United States where the Fourth Amendment applies, and unless you have probable cause of a crime, you don't have the legal authority. There's no inspections. I don't know.
This was no smell. This was none of that shit. That stuff doesn't matter anyway. That's bullshit anyway. But this was nothing tangible to point to. This was somebody saying it.
Yeah, piss off. That would be my response. Yeah.
The Fourth Amendment has never existed to protect drug users, people who use cannabis or otherwise, and people. One of our most basic rights is like the ability to exist without humiliation tactics, without illegal searches. But what class of people are consistently victim of these no-knock raids, of these illegal, what we consider to be illegal searches? It's not people who are committing violent crimes. It's people who are using drugs. And I know that we all get like weird now when I say like drugs and I'm talking about cannabis, but let's be real about all drug offenses kind of linking in the same area, which is being victimized and stigmatized in a way that creates policy that drags down not only that drug user, but their entire family, right? And it really creates generational trauma. And that's what we're seeing here, right?
Yeah, the over incarceration of American citizens is just ridiculous. And when we talk about places like Warren, Michigan has a big reputation as being do whatever the hell they want, and if you don't like it, you can sue us. Kind of a city. They proved that with their cannabis licensing program. They proved that with their batshit crazy mayor Warren, Fouts. He's insane, and they have a
guy's scary looking too.
There's a video of him, and I will describe the video. Just that he's got a baseball bat threatening to beat somebody up in the middle of the street. So that's this guy. He would probably do it. Although he's so small, it probably wouldn't hurt if he hit you with it. It'd be like one of those. Boom, really?
He's spindly. There might be some spring in that.
I don't want to that.
As a citizen, it pisses me off, though, that these local municipalities are going about it this way, because what's happening is they're going to get these shit sued out of them, and the person that's doing the suing is going to be in the right. And as a taxpayer, I don't want my money and my taxes that I put into the system to be squandered on stupid legal cases that have zero legal basis because the mayor or the cops don't like weed.
For further perspective, go ahead, Jose. I just want to.
No, I always feel like that's it. They're going to win or we're going to win, but it doesn't actually work that way, right? So, like with Trebek, I was like, well, Judith is going to take this to court and she's going to win because Trebek is clear as fuck. And they were like, no, fuck you, Judith. Like, sorry, Jimmy.
So what happened is she won with Trebek, and then there was the DeRuyter case, and that is what the basis of all this bullshit is.
Right.
But how does it like Hartwick is clear?
Because it was vague. Because the DeRuyter case is vague.
And DeRuyter it's a judicial decision. We know that sometimes those take a direction that probably the law doesn't indicate. Sometimes decisions from the judicial branch come from emotional-based things, not necessarily legal-based things. And like Jamie said, I mean, they can even reverse 10 years of previous legal understanding of what we're allowed to do. It's no wonder people are accidental criminals with the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, because they keep changing the goalposts all the time. We don't know exactly where to run. So
I think, it was something that I'm seeing anyway, and this is the optimist in me. I just read recently, January, about social pages, like people's social websites, social media sites like Facebook and Instagram that are not shutting down. Names of these sites that incorporate cannabis or marijuana or pot or these sorts of words. And they even referenced Jim Belushi and how he had been getting knocked off the internet, repeatedly, and now he's been on all year in 2022. So maybe there's some leniency happening, and that's, I can see like we need more of that in mainstream media. We need more of that from our news casters, people just putting it out there that this is something that needs to be taken care of, because it is. I don't think there's enough out there in the media that's helping this movement. And if it were, people would become so much more mainstream, and people would be like, yes, of course, it's fine. And I think that's the case, is people will be fine once it's all out there. But I don't know. I mean, I can go off a long time just about educating people, and that's what we really need. And we need more empathy in our leaders. So maybe from the top down, you just start,
We have to hold media accountable, though. You're absolutely right about that. And one thing I'll tell you is 10 years ago, when media wanted to do a story about cannabis, they dug into patient stories. They talked about sick people, or they talked about the different things. Nowadays, if they want a cannabis story, they just reprint a press release from somebody who just announced a new product line based on some guy that only about 10 people have ever heard of before. But, maybe he had one song in the 80s or something, and now he's got a cannabis line. So journalists are able to do lazy journalism nowadays when it comes to covering our industry. So they don't do the good stuff. Kyle Kaminsky gets in there. Kyle Kaminsky from Lansing City Pulse does it.
Yeah, Larry does it.
Hey, why don't you give him a little bit of
Kyle gave out 200 joints.
Because he just recently wrote an article and started off by saying how he had been so wrong for thinking that the THC content of the flower that he was evaluating made a shit of a difference, and then went on to discuss why he doesn't believe it does anymore. And
you want to really hear some? I'm sorry, Jamie. I apologize.
No, I just thought that was commend-worthy for him.
He's a good guy, but if you really want to hear some in-depth talk about Michigan cannabis, go to the Michigan Crime Stories podcast and listen to the 4-part series about the pin-counting paralyzer. It's wonderful. Gus Burns from MLive narrates it. He wrote the whole thing. It's just really a great in-depth look at the whole evolution of the paralyzer and how it really represented Michigan's underground cannabis industry at a time when they were trying super duper hard to shut us down, and now it's carried over into the regulated market. So it's come full circle.
I heard that's coming back. I heard the paralyzers. Some folks got a hold of the genetics or whatnot, and that'd be kind of cool to have it introduced to the market.
Listen to the podcast, not just because I'm in that podcast too, by the way. I'm not going to try and lie about that. But the fact is, if you listen to that, it'll tell the whole story about how they got those seeds and how they got that genetics. And somebody said, literally, it's a great story. Somebody said, I got these seeds left over from like the 70s. So he takes the seeds and he went on the internet to see how to revive seeds. And they said, rough it up with some sandpaper before you put it in some salt. And he was like, individual seed, I'm roughing it up with some sandpaper. It's wonderful. It's a good story. So it's really well produced as well. So, but yeah, I mean, when you talk about it, media does have to do a better job of representing us. And I thought that podcast, although it did talk about some people who were lawbreakers, it kind of favored us in a good light, those of us who are lawbreakers or were.
It's just cannabis. It's just cannabis.
Yeah,
exactly. Cannabis is the word too, guys. I really think it's a little annoying to see pot shops or weed store and that sort of description in the headline just doesn't serve anyone in this industry. So
yeah, I don't even like to see marijuana anymore, and I know that it's a touchy subject. I understand that we're speaking to a certain degree of the audience that doesn't necessarily understand cannabis equals marijuana, and that they want to appeal to the lowest common denominator in the intelligence base.
Some people view it as marijuana, but don't view it negatively at all, and just innocently kind of just use the word without any ill intention. And but it is a good time to educate on those.
We don't need the pot and the weed. I mean, we don't.
You know what we say in Ben Harbor is weed, and I think that it is crazy. And I think we get in these conversations about marijuana absolutely being racist and the term being racist. But what's real is that the cannabis industry itself is very white, and these terms that we use are very fucking white. And I don't care what people say, but I think that the people in my neighborhood and the people that I know, they buy weed and they smoke weed. And
Josey,
then
it's scientific. It's not white. Don't say that. It's not. It's the Latin term for cannabis. Stop saying
people,
it's
I'm
white.
saying that
Scientific
in
term.
terms of completely Xing out or alienating or maybe creating a negatory connotation with the word like weed that's used every day in black and brown neighborhoods, to say that this is, I mean,
You clearly don't believe that only black and brown people call it weed, right?
No.
You can't possibly be trying to own that
So, but-
phrase just for black and brown.
But
I'm trying to
point
tell
being
you-
that some people also legitimately and innocently and with no
It
ill
is
intent say
part of the
weed,
language.
you know, and stuff
right,
like
it's part of the language, it's part of the
It is.
culture.
I do-
It gets lost.
It is part of the language. You're absolutely right. It is part of culture. It's just irritating.
It can
It's
be.
not like blunts, you know.
I mean, I understand what Josey's saying. Like some people use that word and it's not a big deal. But I think if the media started using the word cannabis as opposed to pot or weed, it would turn some of the stigma around on, for people in general.
Yeah, for sure.
I use the
Media
word
should be
weed,
there.
I use the word pot, and it's very loosely used. But when I'm talking professionally or in a business, or we're talking about cannabis, and we're a little bit more serious and professional, and because it affords that.
But I think it's one of those generational things we talked about before. If you grew up calling it weed, you're going to call it weed till you die. And it doesn't matter what RT or anybody else says. That's just the way you are. And we don't hate on people for the way they are. But when we talk to media doesn't have those indoctrinated is what I'm trying to say. Those indoctrinated habits of calling it weed. Media can change. When they
Media
choose
has
not to change, it bugs
responsibility.
me.
Media has a responsibility and they have the ability to portray the industry in a way that can be beneficial or can be backwards. And I think that that's what you're saying is calling it a pot shop is ridiculous. Agreeable. Putting up I think anytime we see stories about cannabis in the media, it always contains, for a long time, it contains some kid and somebody with dreadlocks smoking a joint, or one of their stock photos from Hash Bash. And now I think that it gets more on these product reviews and these releases. And we have these really cool people like Kyle at the City Pulse that are doing just really awesome work. And I guess, remember Steve Green's Green Report in the City Pulse? That was amazing. That was like the first time I'd ever seen anything like that in a everyday newspaper. Larry Gabriel would come to us at every High Times event, and
Larry's awesome.
in front of his
higher ground.
It's amazing the niche for marijuana that we have in mainstream media here. And there are people that are doing it right, but there's absolutely people that villainize it.
You remember in the early days of the medical marijuana era, like 9 and 10, Metro Times used to be super thick because it was filled with all the ads from all of the cannabis dispensaries across the state. It's the only place a lot of us could advertise, but I mean, it was ridiculous. They were making money hand over fist off us gray market dispensaries, and it all worked out just fine. And now, even with we have more than 400 regulated market facilities, it still isn't back to that way because there's so many restrictions on what you can say and what you can do with advertising. Anton and I were just part of a phone call with Director Brisboe yesterday morning, and we talked about the restrictions on advertising, and I was kind of shocked at some of the things that they actually had to say.
Yep.
So
it's amazing.
There's rules for everything.
And the other thing regarding media too is I think we need to look at how people are consuming media nowadays. It's not like the 80s and the 90s when you had like the newspaper and CNN. There's such a variety of sources where people are getting news from, and I think sifting through all of it to decide it would be mind numbing. So I guess trying to.
This is the reason why headlines are important, though, right? Because what we know about American consumers is that they're not folding out a paper and reading an entire article. They're spending, Joes, you probably know better than I. What's the average time people spend looking at something on the internet? Like 7-10 seconds, something like that?
Definitely less than 5 seconds.
So if the headline is misleading, then they get the wrong impression about what the rest of it is. Or if the first paragraph doesn't get right to the point, then they lose interest. So, I mean, it's important how media presents things. And the way in which it's delivered to our consuming public. I think. I mean,
not sure it's as ethical as it is. I think the ethics of journalism and media and everything, just with the different sources, the internet, just where you can find media and you can find news nowadays. I mean, hopefully down the road it'll settle at some point. You know what I mean? Like we'll have. I guess the internet is probably the most popular, but yeah, it's just different than what it was in the past.
I remember when I was growing up, there was just essentially newspapers and radio stations, and they were all under the FCC's regulation. And if a newspaper stepped out of line, did bad, interview techniques or whatever, the FCC would slap them with a fine. And they very famously, Washington Post beat them on the Watergate case, things like that. But nowadays, there really isn't a governing body over what's being said on the internet, and how could there be?
Zuckerberg.
There's thousands and thousands of podcasts out there, just like ours, and some of them they talk about some really heinous stuff. They talk about hurting people. They talk about how best to gain advantage over other people in business, and
Facebook jail. That's as good as it gets nowadays.
Right. So when you're talking about modern communications, that's why I think it's even more important to know where you're getting your data from. So, I mean, it could just be some guy in a White Panthers hat. You don't know what his experience level is. You have no idea what that guy's doing, right? That's Jamie. I'm just describing Jamie.
That's not. It says Michigan.
Oh, that's not the White Panther one?
No.
Okay. Well,
I mean,
my bad then.
I enjoy that one and often wear it, but this one.
Jamie has a
doesn't have
famous hat that he wears to protest. He wore it to the Bill Schuette protest, and he yelled obscenities at him, and so he wears it all the time to these places where he's gonna yell obscenities at people. So be careful of the red, white, and blue hat.
Slight exaggeration.
Deny that. No, it's not a slight exaggeration.
And now I wear it. Unfortunately, it looks like one of the insurrectionists, caught on that video. So I try to tone down that image a little bit.
The fact is that hat's been around when we were doing protests after the first series of Oakland County raids in 2010, and then what happened to Basor that fall, and our setup in Metamora, as well as Big Daddy in January, and the whole cascade of things that happened after that. That hat's been around. So.
Does the AG play a role in deciding on who gets raided and who doesn't get raided?
It's a local prosecutor's decision. Oftentimes, it's a magistrate's decision.
But they're directed. In Schuette's case, he did this tour that said, "Hey, I'm Bill Schuette. Here's how you get around the Medical Marijuana Act and be an asshole." And so, if we would have had a different AG, we would have, in my opinion, had a different outcome of the act at this point.
Yeah.
Is that
I think go ahead, Anton, please.
I was just saying, prosecutorial discretion is a powerful sword to be able to wield. If the local district attorney says, "Hey, we're going after caregivers because we're getting all these complaints," I mean, what's to stop them at that point? They're just gonna.
I don't think there was complaints. That wasn't the thing. The thing was, Bill Schuette came to them and said, "Hey, these guys suck. Here's why. They're going to burn down
his
their
predecessor
buildings. They're hash oil. They were criminals 2 years ago. I can fix it." It was all this preliminary stuff that was getting ahead of it before anybody was causing any problems. He created an issue that wasn't there. This is something we see.
And he wanted to keep it as prohibitive as possible. And
Eric Gunnels did that a podcast that I watched, and he talked about this whole ordinance that had been built up because of one man that they could point to, just one man, right? And so the less cases that could have went through the court. So they do have obviously discretion, but the discretion is go against the AG or do your own thing and fight for that funding or whatever. And it was a weird time.
Well, it's still sort of that way because each individual prosecutor makes a decision for their own county. We know that Ali Savitt in Washtenaw County is going to be very, very compassionate towards any cannabis cases, as opposed to probably guys in Barrack County or
Macomb County,
where Anton lives. Absolutely,
they're it pisses me off, Rick, to the point to where I still want to know why Macomb Township wants you to have the fire inspector and the building inspector inspect your nutrients before you use them in your cannabis grow. Like,
What?
yeah, oh yeah. If you go there,
and then how would they, or should they know that there's a cannabis grow?
Well, I can throw Miracle Grow on my cannabis. Half the shit that people throw on their front lawns is higher in heavy metals than anything you could find in the hydro store. Like, what if I want to use the hydro nutrients to water my tomatoes? Is that okay at that point? Like, what's the line? Why is it because it's for cannabis that makes these nutrients and other things so scary to the average citizen? I just don't.
It's education. It's just an education in town, we're always talking about it because it's needed all the time. And I don't know. It's like we just have to keep on educating people. That's really it.
How do you hire for a job like that? Like, how do you hire a nutrient professional? Like, what do you do?
They send the building inspector out, who is not law enforcement. That's the other thing, is now we're sending government officials who are really, really not prepared to be law enforcement.
Grow tomatoes? How does the fuck does he know what nutrients is right?
And to what degree has he been educated on the subject to know what he's even looking at?
This is the land issue.
Look, I was a fireman back in the day, and I'm telling you, we had nothing to do with nutrients. Never once did I ever have anything to do with fertilizer.
There's nothing in the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act that says that whatever nutrients are used to grow the plants your grow has to ultimately be inspected by somebody. That's too restrictive.
But
you're telling me, as a fireman, you're not an expert on gardening?
They don't even need to know that you're growing.
That's crazy.
That's a 3-time two-handed hoe right there. I know what that is because I'm a fireman.
I believe in Macomb Township, they want even a regular patient. If you're a patient who's growing your 12 plants for yourself, I believe there's some sort of permit that they think people are going to go to the city and get, which DeRuyter had zero to do with individual patients. Like, who is the genius in that attorney circle who pitched that and thought it's okay to do it? It clearly goes against the act.
Challenge everything now based on it and not believe that it's frivolous. There's an opening.
Well.
So what we're really talking about, and this has been a great conversation, is that here in Michigan, for those people that might be watching it nationally, there's been a decision called DeRuyter, which previously caregivers were not regulated by their local authorities because the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act has that supremacy clause we mentioned earlier in the broadcast. But DeRuyter reversed that and said that it is possible for townships and cities and villages to have some restrictions on caregivers. They didn't say what restrictions were allowed, what restrictions were not, but that opened the door for all these municipalities to begin to concoct their own individual brew of hate, if you don't mind me saying so, to deliver upon licensed caregivers. And a caregiver is a person who's been chosen by a patient to grow their plants because the patient is not capable of doing so, either because of illness, because their living situation, maybe they're in an apartment and they can't grow 12 plants. There's just a number of reasons why someone would select a person to be a caregiver. And in order to be a caregiver, you have to actually give a lot of time, effort, and space towards the work. So these are not people that are just trying to game the system in order to get an advantage. No, it's real work being a caregiver, and you don't enter into that contract lightly. So when cities choose to screw with those people, it's doubly devastating, Anton, don't you think?
Yeah, well, and here's the thing is, there are folks where I can see where complaints are popping up, and there are people that are disrespectful and they're acting outside the law. I mean, why is the government so interested in what I'm doing in my home? As a citizen, this is the place we have. It's the most sacred of places in our country. Why should I have to worry about the local building inspector knocking on my door if I'm legally growing my 12 plants, following the law to the letter of the law? It's not fair. And what about home occupations?
So originally Judith Pontius did win by Terbeek as the basis of the Court of Appeals decision. Mm-hmm. Then the DeRuyter decision took place. It was sent back to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals then made this really ridiculous reversal that included shit like if you're local, you can call it a home occupation and then invoke all the restrictions and all that kind of stuff that you can on home occupations. and all that kind of shit was really horrible. At that point, Judith's lawyer did not challenge that again. And request leave to the Supreme Court for them to say, is this what you meant? This lady who's got her normal patient count with enough space and everything in her basement to do it. And that's that, do you mean
Who's got a clean criminal record otherwise? Like, it's not like she's like some
worked for the city for 30 years or whatever.
Yeah, she's an exemplary member of the community. Like Jamie said, worked in the very building where she was prosecuted.
Oh my God.
Not necessarily prosecuted, but where she was found guilty of breaking the city ordinance.
Yeah, so this stuff's got to get challenged again. There's so many things that just weren't settled by that was trying to be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
But just like with Tuttle, and what we're going to see is that we challenge it and they still are shitty and wrong. And then we just live with it forever. Right? I mean, that's how it is. I don't know a lot of great. So Tui's a great one. Obviously Green, but that got overturned. I don't know a lot of great cases that came out where I was like, this is a real win. This was fantastic.
We've talked about some cases over the years. Redden and the concurring opinion in Redden.
No.
It was just horrible, and they used that for years. And it wasn't even law. It was just an opinion written by a judge. And every sheriff and local police chief would wave that concurring opinion in front of the city council and say, see what I mean? This is exactly what I'm talking about here. There have been some court cases that have just really weighed us down for years and years.
Yeah, concurring opinion on concur, but on more restrictive grounds, and then it went on for like many pages, and it was used these footnotes, and then used as the basis for like prosecutions.
And poor Tori died before that whole thing was
she
over.
died because of this bullshit, right? So like sometimes I'll be like drinking wine and going off on this tangent that they my friends are literally dead because of Bill Schuette, and everyone thinks I'm being dramatic, but I'm not. Like, she was not allowed to take medicine. She had already been deemed terminal. Like, it was the worst ending. And poor Bob, the whole thing was the worst thing ever. And
hey, Joe, have you seen him lately? The guy's doing great.
No.
He's super happy. He looks wonderful. He exercises all the
I'm the only
time.
one that ages. Like, I don't know if y'all have something more read than me or what.
Stud at the senior center. Bob's doing wonderful, but yes, I mean, they put those guys through hell.
It was tragic.
When you have potential criminal charges hanging over your head, or when you have actual criminal charges hanging over your head, and that whole case stretches out, there's no peace. There's no rest. Your mind can never be in a spot where you don't worry about things, because there's always the possibility of, well, I have to plan. What if I have to go into jail? What am I going to do? Do I buy a dog? Because if we both go to jail, what would happen to the dog? Can you imagine having a...
Was that a fucking year after? It wasn't even a year since we had passed it when this all went down, and like...
Yeah. So Bob Redden...
it was months.
We passed the bill in 2008.
Nobody had their med cards yet.
It went into effect in December of 2008, and then the actual program began in April of 2009. But before April 2009, Bob was already growing some plants because he read the law and he knew he was allowed to grow some plants. So he had little teeny tiny seedlings, and he had less than his 24 that he and Tori were both expected to allow because they both had verifiable medical conditions that would have given them cards. And the cops busted him because he was just early on the program, and they just beat on that guy. I'm telling, not literally, but the court system in Oakland County just ground him up and spit him out. They would send him up to an appellate court, then back down to district court.
He won in district court originally. I think Matt Abel at the time. He had a few attorneys come on at the end.
Yeah. Because the issuance of a card doesn't automatically be the thing that decides whether or not you deserve patient status. It's your illness. And the court recognized that right off the bat, the intent of the voters. And then it all got twisted.
Yeah. Oakland County. Bouchard.
Did she pass before
Jessica Cooper.
was over?
But now there's Karen McDonald.
Yes.
So
she passed her last days. We're still wondering whether the cops at any moment were going to come in, even in her sick condition, and take her away.
Yeah.
That's not fair. You shouldn't do that to
She
people.
had cancer and stuff, but as you said, wasn't able to have her normal.
Imagine this for all my friends that like take RSO and have done this as caregivers and have literally seen their friends with cancer. Everyone's heard Alyssa Irwin's story, right? Seeing real success stories. And Bob couldn't do that for it. No one could.
But it doesn't matter the cannabis medicines, if your body's in a state where you're so anxious and you're so nervous and your body chemistry is so fucked up because you're always in this fight or flight mode, it's going to be very difficult for your body to fight stuff off. Even if you're given all the tools in the world, all the chemical tools that your body can need, still that condition.
It's
Plus
horrible.
the cancer. Plus the
It's
cancer.
the worst thing you can do to a person, that type of adrenaline pumping through your system. Oh, I know. Some days I like to say if they could remove my adrenal glands, I would happily give them up, because that, especially with PTSD, that's my biggest complaint, is that sudden, you're always on an adrenaline rush. And to do that to people who are sick is inhumane. It's horrible.
Mhm.
And our legal process really does stretch cases out. We talk about the swift, application of justice, but in the American judicial system, really, there's nothing swift. And it's not just the civil stuff. You see people, they file suits and counter suits in civil court, and they stretch it out for years. This is criminal stuff. And they like to tell us it takes 6 months to get a sample verified by the Michigan State Police Crime Lab. I say then somebody should lose their job at the Michigan State Police Crime Lab. If you can't get samples processed out, or we need to fund a second lab. Whatever it takes, you cannot make people have their entire lives on hold. So you tell your boss, hey, look, I got busted for this thing. I'm innocent, but they're probably going to run me through the courts. I may have to miss some time. Now your boss is like, do I want to keep this guy? Even before you're guilty, you suffer penalty, right?
Nonsense policy. It all goes back to the policy. The cops and the road cop and the beat cop or whatever, those guys are just pawns in a larger game. It all goes back to the policymakers. And
the ultimate deciders, I think, in my mind, are the prosecutors who decide whether you do or do not charge things. As we mentioned, Ely Savitt in Washtenaw County, that guy gets it. All right. So there's not going to be cannabis prosecutions in Washtenaw County. So the police there simply are not going to pursue those crimes unless there's clear trafficking or there's some other overt violation. Right. So it's possible to still have a law-abiding, well-running county and not chase cannabis crimes. We prove it. We have an example right here.
The juice has to fit the squeeze there too. You know what I mean? You're right. They're not going to spend resources if a prosecutor's just going to decline the cases. And looking forward to next year, what these upcoming races with our governor and AG and whatever, we have to start looking forward as well. Like, what could post Whitmer look like if she doesn't win the race? I think those questions are going to start popping up, and that's just going to add to the roller coaster of policy reform in Michigan.
What we're looking at now is a lot of Republicans who had an easy time of securing votes in their district are probably going to have a much more difficult time getting elected. Now, it doesn't mean that those districts are not going to be Republican, but we may see some different faces. And what we've known as a fact is that every 2 years, Jamie Lowell, back me up on this one, every 2 years we got to re-educate the lawmakers, don't we?
Yeah, sometimes there's a long time before there's a discussion or kind of reference to what's going on or the current, thought on cannabis, and from our perspective anyway. And people come along and, as what's been happening, and offer up kind of a convincing yet incorrect, account of what needs to be done. We run into these challenges, and fortunately, a lot of people came together to try to do something about it this time around, but they have the ability to also be quite formidable in their pursuit. So this is the predicament that we're in. I mean, because the legislature changes hands, quite often.
I can forgive ignorance, but when people are willfully ignorant, that's the problem. When the problem comes into play, and they want to be ignorant about the issue.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
There are people out there that don't know who Mike Calton is, or who don't know who Rick Jones is. And I can appreciate that when you walked into the industry, those people were no longer in office, but the troubles they caused, the bills that they passed, the things that they did and said are what shaped the industry as it is right now. So when new legislators come in, sometimes they want to do the same things that we've seen bad people do before. And they may want to try and do it for a good reason, but this is a record that we don't like to listen to being played over and over when some of these new legislators come in. And sometimes it is the first person to tell them how things are is what they truly believe. It's difficult to deprogram a House rep who really doesn't want to be deprogrammed, who heard something that sounded pretty legit, so they bought into it, and now maybe they're trying to find out that it's not legit, but they can't shake themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of transactional stuff that takes place too, and
That's true.
it gets complicated. And we talk about lame duck. Some people asked me today about that and to define it. So I assume that maybe it's a good time just to remind people that all the legislation that we're staving off right now, even that might not come up as much in this year because it's kind of an election year, and some people might not want to really get into this issue very heavily and that kind of stuff. There's a time after the election and before the next session where legislative action can take place. And now you have people that are leaving, already won, whatever the circumstances are. A lot of transactional type discussions take place. Some people call it horse trading. And then a lot of different things are then possible. And so we still are concerned about that. And it has already happened. So it's not just like theoretically possible.
In 2014, we were standing in the legislature, in the Capitol building, ready for our bills to be passed, victorious and happy, only to be told that the Michigan Sheriff's Association had made a phone banking last evening and called all of the House representatives and told them if they voted for these bills of ours, that they would be blackballed or that the legislators would have some serious consequence for doing that. And one House representative specifically was very frightened. Jamie will tell about that. And the fact is the sheriffs stopped our bills from being passed on the very last day of the legislature. There was absolutely nothing we could do. They shut us down. So nothing's ever guaranteed. We were there in like 20, 25 of us there in suits, ready to pop bottles and walked out. Totally
Well, there was
empty.
a possible dispensary thing, which in hindsight never really had much of a chance. And then there was the Representative Kowal bill that you're referring to, and here's my brother referring to my penis right here.
Okay.
There you go.
It's so small they can't even include a K on the end of the word. Wow, that's really bad.
And unfortunately, I mean, it would have helped. It would have helped to have addressed pediatric patients using cannabis amidst other things, and that was expected to get enough support. And there was this 11th hour push by the Sheriff's Association, led by Sheriff Bouchard, Oakland County, Representative Colwell, also Oakland County. In fact, she is reported to have made the comment how she has to go back home, which she did. I think was county commissioner or something like that.
So she withdrew her bill from consideration instead of facing consequences of the sheriff.
Yep. And so nothing good passed. We expected at least to get something out of it.
It was a very bad day. So
Look what happened this past September. I mean, that whole bag of tricks that were busted out, what happened at that hearing was horrible. The fact that there was never an intention for the people's voice to be heard. I mean, if we can't have that, what are we all doing here? If the people can't speak, might as well just shut the doors, turn the lights off, and that's it. Come on.
in the House Regulatory Reform Committee in September, there was essentially a 2-hour committee hearing in which about an hour and 35 or an hour and 40 minutes was given up to government agents, public relations specialists, and bill sponsors. And a very short time, 15 minutes maybe, was given to people to speak. And only a very few of us got to speak. And I was one of them. And what happened to me when I spoke out, Jamie? Tell them.
On which one? I'm sorry, man.
You're so not even paying
I'm
attention.
trying to help our guest here get connected.
I got
Gavelled.
And my hard work did pay off.
They said, "Shut up, you." Essentially, they said,
Rob. Hey, trying to figure this out.
It was a tragedy. Thanks for remembering that, Anton. It was just bad. Yep. Looks like Rob's finger on the camera. Hey, Rob.
Yeah, I'm trying to flip it.
I've been singing things all day long. Jim will tell you.
He has been singing things all day long.
That's right.
Swearing as well. But singing.
Fuck those assholes. That was my
Hey,
song.
Rob, if you want, you can turn. I mean, I don't know if you can see the thing. There you go. There, man.
There he is.
I can't see it if I flip it though.
Your steering wheel's fine.
You can flip the screen maybe, or I mean, like still have it exactly how you're holding it, but flip the way that the
Trying to figure out how to flip it. So
It's
I
in
can
one of the
see,
corners of the screen. It's a couple of little arrows
But-
kind of.
Anyway, Rob Tuttle is joining us, and of the infamous Hartwick Tuttle Supreme Court decisions, which required defendants who were arrested and charged and prosecuted and imprisoned and all the systems components.
Silent hero.
And that ended up being used as the basis for defining what qualifies as being able to utilize a Section 4 or Section 8, depending on what the circumstances are, both. Rob.
Hey, Rob, try the little symbol on your phone that looks like a recycle symbol. It's got arrows kind of going in a circle. Right on your screen in the bottom right or upper right or in one of the corners.
I got a mic, camera mic. Let me see. Okay, let me see the camera. There we go.
Yeah.
Hey,
Live
Well,
TV.
was it really
is
worth
always
it? No.
beautiful.
There you go.
nice.
Thanks, Rob, for joining us today on Jazz Cabbage Cafe.
Yeah.
I know it's a sensitive subject, and we appreciate you giving your insight into a kind of a dark chapter in your life, man. Perhaps I spoke too soon.
Yeah, froze up for a second.
It's okay.
Hold on.
We did hear that, though, Rob. Good.
Yeah.
Josie, what's on the mug you're drinking there? Show us the picture on the mug, Josie.
Do you mean my George Bush double mug? It's a lot easier, believe it or not, to find these than it is
There
to
he
find
is.
Bill Shooty Fucky mugs, but
Just came back, and hopefully he comes back on here. So also, Rob has been involved, and he's had his own businesses and worked for other places and stuff like that in terms of security and alarms and other things, and has applied that to the cannabis industry since really early on, since we were doing
higher Rob.
super gray market first run stores in the state. He was helping to put a lot of those alarm systems on. There he is.
So he provides he does alarms and stuff.
Yeah, Rob. So I was telling him about how you've been involved in this industry since really early on, especially with helping with the security and alarms and stuff like that.
A real tech savvy job.
That's mean, Josie.
It is though. I'm really excited.
Hi, Rob. Are you
Hey,
with us?
how's it going? Yeah, I'm
We're
just
great.
trying to tweak this here.
There you
There
go.
you go. That looks perfect.
I was trying to get it on my.
Hey, that's cool.
Look at the steering wheel here.
All right. Can you hear us okay, man?
Yeah, I had the
Nice.
Bluetooth on my truck, and I was just trying to make it work.
Looks like you're doing great now.
Yeah, since we can hear you now.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, let's get started then.
Thanks
All
for
right, I'm
joining
here.
us, man.
Thanks for having me. This is kind of cool. I watch you guys, and then it's nice to be a part of it.
I remember in years ago when the case was going to, in your case was going to the Supreme Court, and on Planet Green Cheese, we were talking about the amicus briefs that were being written by some different groups and interests. That was a long time ago. So anyway, man, we were talking about how you've been involved in the industry since kind of early on with security and alarms and stuff like that, whether with your own operation or working with other companies and stuff.
So yeah, basically my story was, I jumped in the game a little early back in 2008. I thought everything was kosher. I got everything licensed. I was being a caretaker for like my cousin and then a couple of friends, people I knew. But my mistake was that I did a transfer on some overages to somebody I didn't really know. I didn't know him very well, and he got in trouble, so he decided to flip on me. And he flipped on me, and then they said, well, I've made a crime because he wasn't one of my patients, even though he was a caretaker, or he was a patient. I verified it, and he was of age and everything else. So I thought everything was cool. Well, that wasn't going to work, so they hit me on that. And then I felt like I was being wrong, so I went ahead and fought it. And I was on pretrial for over 4 years. Don't really recommend that. So they were trying to say because my crime, which I met him up over at a Myers and did the transfer with him, and he was another patient, like I said. And so I went ahead and said, well, everything that I had at my house was registered and, done legitly, that aspect cannot be tainted because of what I did somewhere off-site off the property. But I thought doing the transfer to another patient would be fine, but they changed and stuff. It was still gray. And so I went in, I got hard to get accepted to the Supreme Court. That's kind of an anomaly to get accepted. And I did. And so I kept fighting it. And I eventually just ran out of money. I spent a lot of money. And I just couldn't handle the stress anymore, because you got to check in every day and pee in a cup and blow in the tube. And it was hell. And then still rubbed salt in the wound because of the money I spent like $90,000 or whatever on an attorney plus other fees and everything else. And
so Rob, at the end, you actually had to take a plea then, right?
Yeah, I had to end up just taking a plea. They were like, all right, do a year in the clink and OCJ. And I was just ready to get done with it, because I didn't want to go into debt and everything else and keep checking in. And, I couldn't really go anywhere. So like if I tried to go up north or something, they would call me on a Saturday and I had to be down there. It was just a huge pain in the butt, and it was stressful. So I eventually caved in, and this, my caseworker says I'm lucky. There's other people that have got it worse, and she had kind of hinted like other people got like 3 years for doing stuff like that. And I just felt like I was being wronged and it wasn't right. He was another patient. I did the correct amounts, and I had a small little thing in my shed, a little 10 by 12 shed, wasn't like a building or anything. It was just a bed.
And by the way, at that time, it was very reasonable to interpret the act to think that you could have this exchange between patients.
Right.
Medical use included a patient.
There was nothing that said you couldn't.
It actually did say you can transfer from a patient or from a caregiver to a patient. It was only later determined by the courts that meant a patient to whom they are connected through the registry database. But for years, that was the basis of a lot of our dispensary operations, was the key phrase in law And the Supreme Court saying that every phrase has meaning. You can't imagine something different.
Rob, when
Yeah,
you
and medical use, you know, what the patient can do. If two patients are doing it, there's nothing that violates medical use of, you know, so
Exactly
that was the
right.
other our interpretation.
Exactly right.
And that was early on, the circumstances here with Rob. It
Go
wasn't
ahead, Joe.
unreasonable. Go
Go
ahead,
ahead, Joe. You had a
what
question?
does it mean? What do you mean when you say you had a 4-year pretrial period? Oh no, I really want to know.
Hey, Rob, are you still with us?
Yeah. One of those areas
Oh, no.
where you weave in and out of connection, I guess.
Yep.
man.
So Rob
There's
spent
basic-
a year in jail. And,
Yeah.
and
And he got to the point where he just had to get it over with, because while trying to force his right to have his day in court, he had to submit to all like bond conditions and everything, which is like,
where was he incarcerated?
Oakland County.
Oh God. He like.
I mean, he
people-
should confirm that, but that's my belief, you know, just to
The
without having
crime,
this information. in
crime
front
they
of me.
charged him of was in Oakland County, so I imagine, unless he went to the Penn state penitentiary, he
It was
probably
1
stayed
year,
in
so I
OCJ.
guess that's the, you know, sometimes you know.
Who is his attorney?
I forgot his name. He was a good attorney, or well-respected attorney for the area and everything. I think he was also a magistrate and stuff. But maybe when he comes back, we can.
No matter.
I forgot
There
those
were
details.
There was a time, Jamie, Jim was around. Jim knows this too. That there was a time when it didn't matter how good your attorney was, the courts were just fixed against you. They were just not ready. Our ballot initiative had caught him by surprise, and the system was not ready for change, and change was forced upon it. And this is what happens: the system resists change.
Stephen's confirming he heard him say Oakland OCJ, Oakland County.
Oh
County
God.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
But yes. So that's a year in Oakland County Jail, where Rick Ferris did 2 years, which was
And
a
he just-
fucking crime itself.
2017 is when he got out, which is extremely recent. And then to see, you know, this is just, I think we all know a guy who's a caregiver that sells to patients and other patients, and that's a good deed, in my opinion. But imagine what Rob went through, which was $90,000 to prove, like, hey, nobody ever told me this was fucking wrong, which was my point earlier, which was it wasn't until it went through the court that we were like, wait, you can't do that? What do you mean? And I don't think that's fair. And it wasn't.
Please go ahead.
Well, no, I just talk all the time. You should probably go.
Well, the same thing with Carruthers' decision. For those people who are not familiar with it, Carruthers essentially changed the way that they defined cannabis and essentially made all cannabis concentrates illegal at that particular point. So for 4 years, we've been going, hey, cannabis concentrates, it says in the law, cannabis and all the derivatives thereof. A concentrate is absolutely a derivative of cannabis, so we have the right to do this. And then Carruthers came by, and law enforcement was like, see, this is why we kept hounding you all those times, because it was always illegal the whole time, even though you were saying it wasn't.
See what we
And
made
it
our
was-
friends do.
Yeah, but we had to actually have legislation. Jamie, back me up on this. We actually had to have legislation introduced in order to correct Carruthers. It couldn't be corrected by another court case. It actually had to be fixed by the lawmakers.
Literally, the decision on why they denied it, so that they thought that it was a legislative issue. So the legislators came out with the first, like, real criminal aspects as jail time, you know, in the act. Some weird stuff was added. Which is why when we talk about these caregiver bills, the goal is for me consistently just a no vote and not a let's evolve yay.
Hey,
Rob,
Rob is back. Rob is back.
Made it.
what do you mean by 4 years in pretrial? What does that mean?
Well, I was fighting it, so it took like 4 years because I haven't did a plea or I haven't went to trial, and so like 4 years of limbo.
And you still went to jail. So you were 4 years in limbo. You went to jail. Now you can't even. If you would have
During
just like.
limbo, you're submitting to P tests and shit like that, like you're on bond and stuff.
And there's still shit it costs a ton of money to just be in limbo and fight a court case outside of attorney fees. $90,000 is a fret. And then still going to jail. And you're in, they said OCJ, which is crazy. Oakland County is no joke. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, man. Sometimes.
Rob, we were asking about your time in Oakland County Jail.
Yeah, I'm trying to get you on speakerphone because I'm driving and I can't hear you.
Oh, I hear you.
Hopefully he gets it.
It's a huge jail. It's also like one of the top incubators right now for coronavirus. And people are dying there. For instance, like Rob could have been sentenced. If he was sentenced according to the guidelines, he would still be in jail right now. And there would be a 1 in 5 chance that he would have gotten coronavirus and died.
Okay, Rob, tell us about your Oakland County Jail experience. I mean, it's no fun being anywhere.
Wasn't pleasant. I was highly stressed out, so I was drinking a lot. So when I first went in, if you're, addicted to any substances, as a general speaking for everybody, you let them know, they'll kind of help you detox with that. So I did like an alcohol detox, and for about 5 days. So for the 5 days, they locked me up. I was in jail for 4 days. They put me in a single cell by myself for 4 days, and I was finally bonded out. So that was my first experience. They just took me in, and I just went right up to the second floor. The second time, when I did the plea, decided to get it over and done with, did the 8 months, a year. They check you in, go get your picture taken and everything from intake. And on the inside, they have like it's like a multi-room area. And I remember it very vividly. There's, for general people who just get locked up and you're sober and everything else, they just put you in a general intake and they squeeze you in there like cattle. Because when I was there, I did some trustee work. So I got to see the whole jail. I could draw you up a blueprint of the jail right now. I could talk about the jail for a long time on how everything goes. And if somebody that is going to jail, I could talk to them and tell them what to expect. But basically for the first 5 days, they give you like a doxepin or something like that. This makes you really tired. And you just sleep off all your, until you start sobering up and you lose the detox phase. And they basically drug you up. And you stay in this cell that's in the intake area with other similar, like medical type people that are doing the same thing. Then once you detox, they'll send you to where you're basically going to stay. They classified me as like a medium, which is just basically a general, like a general interpretation. Now, if you're a violent person, you're in there for assault or something, they make you wear orange shirts. And then the rest would be blue shirts. So if you see some in OJC that are wearing an orange shirt, they're in there for a violent reason.
Were there a lot of people in orange shirts?
Yeah, there's quite a bit. And the funny thing is, once you're in there and you decide to do some programs and such, like where they got like AA and then they got like church stuff, and then they just have like group talk. And I did one of these group talks, and there was orange shirts in the group talks with like a counselor. and you're just all in the same room. There's like 10 of you.
So, are the majority of the people in the blue shirts, or are there a lot of violent offenders in there? Who's
Mostly
sitting in the-
blue shirts.
Right.
Mostly blue shirts.
Could you have safely social distanced there? Was there places to? How do you feel? You just narrowly escaped being in there for COVID. You know, if you would have continued to fight it, and lost, and ended up there, do you think you could have? There were procedures there and ready for a crisis like coronavirus.
No, you're in there. You're in there tight. There's no way to. If somebody's got something and you're there, I don't. Even if you're wearing a mask, you're getting it.
Was it?
Oh yeah, you're tight quarters.
Over some kind of capacity, over some kind of like legal capacity. Did they cram more people in there that should have been there?
So yeah, they do that, and what they got these beds. They look like those boards that lifeguards use when you carrying a body or whatever. They call these boats. There's plastic beds that they put in there, and then you sleep on the floor in the boat. And so they got like basically an 8-man cell, and they got 12 people in there, and then couple people are on boats on the floor with blankets. And you're tight quarters, and someone's sick, you're getting it.
So you were sentenced in 2016 when we all thought we were legalizing marijuana. Did you think you were going to get a year in jail? Ever? The whole time?
Was I thinking I would get what in jail?
Did you think you were going to get jail time at all? Or did you think you could have... is that something that was in your mind?
I wanted to fight it and do a jury trial, but I just didn't want to pay it. I already had it cost me like $10,000 just to do paperwork for the Supreme Court. And like I said, I ended up spending like 90 grand on all this, and it was just ridiculous. And it just would have been more money to do a jury trial. And I kind of felt like if I did do the jury trial, I'd have like a 60% chance of, it not going anywhere. But then again, if you lose, they're going to slam dunk you.
Right, yeah.
So instead of just sucking it up and doing the 8 years, you're doing 3 or 4.
So
the system influences you in many ways, including extra penalties if you fight them, right?
Right. Yeah, they didn't like that.
when did the original charges happen? When did it all start? What year?
Man, I don't understand why people are calling me.
Murphy's Law.
It all started like in 2012.
So if you would have just pled to this, see, the whole thing is, I think that you, and you could correct me, right? Though part of it was obviously this is unjust and I don't deserve this. The other part is, hey, nobody else in Michigan deserves this shit either, right? And you were fighting for more than just yourself, which is so admirable.
Right.
But if Rob would have just been like, hey, fuck it, give me a plea deal where I don't go to jail and it'll be fine, I could expunge his record and everything would be Gucci and good, and then he'd be moving on. But that's not the way it is, right? Rob went out there, he put $90,000. That's a number that I swear to fucking God I heard. $90,000. Rob did that all himself, right? Is that true, Rob?
Yep. And that was just for attorneys. You still got to figure all the drops.
It was for like this idea that this is unjust. People, and there's already been established that patients can buy marijuana anywhere, right? And there is not enough supply for one person to consistently, there's all these variables when it comes to growing cannabis. And all your friends were doing the same thing, right? Nobody knew at all that you couldn't sell weed to patients if you weren't their caregiver.
Right. And it was still gray. So because it was gray, the judges were like, no, you can't do that. Doesn't say anywhere you can do that. And it's like, well, yes, it does. And they're like, no, because they're all against it.
Is the idea that if it's not explicitly in the act that it's not protected? if the like verbatim, what is the
Right. And they kept pushing the doctor-patient relationship. I forgot what the technical term was.
oh
Bona fide relationship.
is this why they
Bona fide.
have brick and mortar buildings?
Yeah,
So-
they're trying to find anything okay, bona fide, and I proved, I went to the doctor, I went and got checked up, and he says it was cool. This is not like I just went to a fair and saw somebody for 5 minutes. It was like a doctor I was seeing, and I do a checkup like every 6 months to a year, and says, yeah, you're good.
So they wanted to know your medical records, or they wanted to know the guy who sold you marijuana's medical bullshit?
What they were doing
Just
at the time
mainly
was
me.
they were trying to say that someone who you claimed to be a patient was not a legitimate patient because they didn't get a correct approval from their medical doctor, which meant that all of the stuff that happened afterwards was illegal. It's a way to trap caregivers at that time.
So they weren't
Right.
saying, hey, you can sell to somebody under Section 8 if there is a medical necessity. They weren't saying, hey, you can't do that. They were saying, hey, you can do that as long as you can prove that there is a bona fide patient relationship, doctor relationship.
No.
So in compassionate apothecary, we had what's called asymmetric protection, which the compassionate apothecary decision came out before Rob's decision.
That's
McQueen.
What it was saying, and what it said basically is that a patient can buy from anybody, anywhere, including a caregiver. A patient's protected because they're trying to acquire for their own medical use, but a caregiver can only distribute to their 5. And prior to that, caregivers, as we talked about before, we were under the impression caregivers could sell to anybody that had a medical card. That's how we interpreted the law.
But there's still the unregistered caregiver and those types of transfers. And if you establish that the patient did have a bona fide doctor-patient relationship, you took an active interest in that patient's medical care, examined like, hey, what might, went through some type of, interview about what might work for them and that kind of stuff. And then you'd be able to set yourself up for a better chance at an affirmative defense. That came out of that in some ways. That came out of that at least, but
I mean, that was never going to be possible in Oakland County. Sorry, man. There was at that point they weren't even letting you say like, "Hey, I have a marijuana card," right? And King County was doing the same thing. They were like, "Medical marijuana doesn't exist here," so. And in a county that the majority voted that it should, like, what the fuck?
Right. That's why I wanted to fight it, because I was thinking if I get in front of a jury, I got a chance. But then it gets scary because if you lose, you're gonna fall hard. It ain't you just do a year in jail. It's
Now you
they
get
got
the
you.
Cannabis is ridiculous. Yeah. Any time of incarceration. So do you that's missing out on holidays. That's missing out on family gatherings. That's missing out. I mean, hell, in 2022, that's missing out on a whole evolution of things. And modern day incarceration is awful. It is definitely something that I think is a new interest here in Michigan with our more liberal or more blue guidance from the AG. So I think Anton was correct. Who you vote for is important, right? So I know that we all feel that we were personally victimized by Bill Schuette. But Rob really was. I mean, all of this could have been really altered and changed if there wasn't a already set in stone agenda, which was caregivers are wrong, they are drug dealers, we can arrest them, here's how.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. And even in 2010, they were trying to set up a system where the Republicans would be able to establish limited commercial opportunities for just the select few. We fought really hard. Kuipers, Kahn, Van Workum, and Cropsey, the set of bills in 2010 that would have established a 10 large grows in Michigan as the only supply of all medical marijuana statewide. So, I mean, early on, they would say they hated marijuana, but they were still trying to structure an industry that favored them and disfavored Rob, because a lot of what happened to Rob and others like him wasn't necessarily because of the way the law was written. It was because they just wanted to squash caregivers transferring to patients, just like they're still trying to do right now, Rob.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
It comes again from
crazy.
villainizing people that utilize cannabis and that are participate in cannabis culture, that participate in any kind of drug culture, whatever. You couldn't do things like humiliation tactics and all these if you valued people that use cannabis or use drugs as people, right? None of this would happen if we had lawmakers that valued those kind of things. And I think that what happens is these people go in there and they are literally seen as drug traffickers, as a guy who sold weed to a guy he didn't know in Meyer, right? And the truth is that who gives a shit, right? What happened after that?
Right.
Hit me up if you're around a Meyer, man. I'm here. I'm out for it.
When they scooped me up, they had probably 20 cops because I went. He came in my car. I gave him a 2.5 ounces, and then I left. And I had a parade of cops behind me. And I got on the M59, and I just looked my rearview mirror. I swear it was like 20 cops with all their lights on.
So when you're looking at your tax bill in Oakland County and you're all pissed about your property taxes, it's because they sent 20 cops to get robbed 4 years. Or God, oh my God, has it been 10 years this year? This is 10
It's
years.
been.
It'll be 10
It
years.
was
this year.
2012.
Yeah, you're right.
Whoa.
But then I can't get clemency or whatever you want to call it until after like 5 years, till everything's all said and done. Like
Yeah.
probation's done and all the other. I had to do 3 years of probation. You got to call in and blow and pee in a cup, and
And you don't have a
That
driver's
sucks.
license
Ended.
that whole
That must
time,
have just ended.
you know?
yeah, it might. So I might have to fill the form out. I guess I can go and fill the form out right online on the Michigan.gov if you know where to go, and you can read the criterias. If you meet those criteria, you fill the form out and just submit it, and everything should be done. But if you want to speed things up, it's best to have somebody like Paul or somebody to actually have a hearing for you and say, the paperwork's been done, has it been looked at, can we get this expunged?
He's
That's
referring
really
to
the best.
he's referring to
We're gonna
Attorney Paul
expunge that.
Tolindo when he says Paul.
We
Correct.
all know the expungement god, Paul.
Yep.
Um,
But Josey, of course, with Great Lakes Expungement Network, that's one of the things that they do for people all the time.
Jamie texted me. He was like, "This is fucking bullshit. Rob had a cannabis thing. He's like constantly got this rant that cannabis gets
Because I don't like
destroyed."
that, 'cause the package of bills with the clean slate thing, awesome overall, of course. We acknowledge.
We approve 64% of all
But the
your
delivery and manufacturing, not being part of things that get acknowledged as things that are allowed now is not right.
It's true, and especially when a lot of those charges weren't even real things, right? They were like down here, famously in Berrien County, there was Simcoe Gas was providing a $50 bonus every time they reported an illegal grow, because it was, or maybe not Simcoe Gas, maybe it was AEP, I don't know. There was like a bonus that was to people, and I knew two different people that were in the Compassion Club down here who both did a year in prison and weren't allowed to say, "Hey, I had medical marijuana," right? They just went in there as a person who was growing pot because they wouldn't allow them to submit evidence that said, "Yeah, I'm growing pot, but for my grandma who's 85, right?" Or worse, we didn't know we couldn't have guns in our possession. Nobody fucking told us. Nobody was like, "Hey, if you have a gun around, if your grandpa collected guns and this gun has been passed down since the fucking Civil War and you have it, you're going to fucking jail for a year." And it's crazy that I'm thankful that Rob didn't get stuck in something like that, where it's like worse, like mandatory minimums and situations where, at the bare minimum, people should know what could cause them a year in incarceration. I think Rob got fucked
And
for so long.
And when you ask the government for guidance, the government says, "No, I don't want to tell you what to do. I can't do
We
that.
cannot tell you legal advice.
Figure it out
We
on
can
your own."
only charge you with legal
Yeah.
crimes.
Yeah, we can't do
How are we
that.
supposed to
Jail
make
is
anything
bad.
off of that?
If you want a nail clippers, you got to wait sometimes 2 or 3 days to get a nail clipper. So you got a hangnail or something, and you got to get it out. You're basically like locking yourself up in your bathroom, and you can't get nothing.
And people who experience long-term incarceration, experienced a series of woes at the hands of. So, like, I have a client right now. The dad died, and there's like a bunch of siblings, and one of the siblings are incarcerated. One of the siblings were there at the end of their life. So they all agree that the sibling that was staying there should have the mortgage and have the house and all that shit. Well, the AG gets wind of it, and they're like, we've been holding homeboy on some weed charges since 2010, so you have to pay up for that. You owe us for this guy doing it. And they're like, excuse us, this is a family, this is a house that's been in our family since, however long, several generations. There was no estate planning done. He doesn't even have any ownership of this. How about you take our life insurance portion, you take the liquid assets, whatever. They're like, no way. The housing market right now, we're going to get way more selling the house. Look, forcing this sale of a house. It's been in the family for generations. That wasn't even fucking his, that he will never live in. He's not going to get out.
The gun debate is interesting when you talk about the guns. People don't realize you cannot have a gun. You cannot be a cannabis user in any capacity at any state level and possess a firearm. It's just not federally legal, or have guns. They don't realize it.
Constitutional rights aren't for people that use cannabis. They are for everybody else but drug offenders, right? So you can't have a gun in your possession. You can't put your bullets in one room and the gun in the shed. You can't sell jars for $200 full of weed. Like, I love all of these creative ideas that people have had since 2009, and I think that it is some very ambitious shit. But the truth is that they are out there criminalizing this and criminalizing the act as a whole, and they're still fucking doing it. This idea that we legalize marijuana, I don't know what it's like to have people incarcerated because I'm from Michigan, isn't fucking true, and Rob is just out, just free. I can't bear it. Rob, when did you get your license back?
They suspended my license for a year, and I don't know, I didn't have it for a year.
You automatically lose your license for a minimum of 6 months if you have a drug offense. Even if you aren't driving. Even if you haven't driven in 15 years. Even if you don't
They make it painful. They make it painful on purpose because they don't like it. I mean, I don't know why I'm blowing in a tube. It has nothing to do with alcohol, but it's just a way for them to make money as well.
You talked earlier, Rob, when we talked about $90,000, you said, but you don't forget you have to add in all the drops there too. They require you to do drug testing, what we call drops. They require it on a regular basis, and you have to fucking pay. Can you tell about that?
Yeah, it's you do a drop about once a week, sometimes twice a week, and it's $4 to do that. And then the blow, it's like for the PBT is like $2. And then if you go somewhere other than Oakland County, you can like go to a local sheriff's. They charge you $10 the blow, and then you got to register that, have them sign off on it, and then fax it into the main office. So you end up just driving out to Pontiac all the time because it's cheaper. But then Pontiac's out of the way. If you live in White Lake or something, you got to drive 20 minutes out to Pontiac.
How did you get there with no license?
Oh, you just go. I'm not walking.
Right, either you commit another crime, which is driving on a suspended license, or you commit a separate crime, which is violating fucking probation. And for my friends that live in rural Michigan that have no ride share, no public transportation, how the fuck do I go there? Here in Berrien County, do you know where we go get drug tested? South Bend, Indiana.
Oh, that's bullshit.
We're not allowed to leave the state except for when we go over there and piss in a cup. Try not to get caught while you're going back and forth. And I can't speak for these other border counties, but I'm almost positive that it's the same. The resources in rural Michigan are so scarce, but that doesn't prevent them from jailing and incarcerating them at the same rate as what they're doing, or at a similar rate as what they're doing in other urban areas. Rob, would you say that if you needed to get to your drug testing unit or to your probation officers, could you do that with public transportation where you are? Or would that be Yeah, Sam.
Nope.
What the fuck are you
Gotta
supposed to
have a
do? I don't understand. I'm in a wheelchair.
They don't
right?
care.
How
The court
building
doesn't
is
care.
upstairs. Their elevator was broken one time I went there with my friend. I was like, wait a minute. So like, are you? What would you do? Am I the only disabled person to come in here today? Like, what the fuck? But they do this, right? They create all these barriers, and then that is part of the reason that if you go through drug court, you're seen in such a great godlike manner, because it's literally impossible, right? It's like winning a game show or guessing the exact number on Price is Right. Like, it's not something that people can do without obviously dedication, but also luck. It's fucking hard. Were you able to go through drug court, Rob, or were you just immediately like you were incarcerated?
They wouldn't let me go through I was trying to do different things. I was trying to see the other judge that was for veterans, because I'm a veteran. So I was trying to get veterans court to get away from Judge Warren, but they just kept denying my motions for that. So I just ended up doing the plea.
So
Thanks for your service, Rob. And sorry.
Yeah, thank you for your service, Rob. Do you guys know? Do either of you know what those courts are for? So are they for veterans to go through the criminal process, or what is that for?
Say that again.
The veterans court. What is it for? Is it for like veterans to be able to see a judge that's familiar to veteran issues? Is it for any criminal stuff? What do they do, and how is it different?
I don't know a whole lot about it. I just know it's more geared for veterans because, I've been diagnosed with PTSD, so I do have disability. So I was trying to get the Veterans Court just to kind of get more of more compassion, because they understand, I am this disabled veteran, and I was hoping for more compassion and I was just trying to get out of the claw of Judge Warren, because he's a Republican, he's conservative, he doesn't like this stuff, and I was just trying to get a different, fresh eyes on it, and they wouldn't let me do it. So I was like, I can do drug court, or I can do veterans court, and they were just like, no.
For 2.5 ounces of cannabis, they didn't allow you to go into veterans court. Should be ashamed of themselves. Yeah. It's disgusting to even hear such a thing.
They did. I did 3. I met up with the individual that turned me in. I met up with them 3 individual times, so they had those 3 different times to take it against the court. It wasn't just one time. So then he was, narking on me the 3 times. So it wasn't just one time. It was these 3 different times within 2 weeks, and then after the 3rd time, they scooped me up. So if you don't know somebody, you just got to be really careful.
We need to change that right there.
Somebody, you have to be careful. People in desperate situations do desperate things, and I'm so glad that it wasn't somebody that you knew, and that all of it was terrible. I wish none of that happened, but a lot of times it is somebody that you fucking know. And they put you in a situation where they lie to you, and they say, "Hey, Rob already told me that you're the one growing all the fucking weed here, and that also you commit crimes all the time," or whatever. We have pictures of X, Y, and Z, and they just fucking lie about it.
You're right.
They promise deals, and things are very difficult. So, sorry, Rob.
we turned into an Antifa meeting.
I don't understand why you would interpret that. Why he would, but for our audio only listeners, a comment was submitted by someone that says that our Jazz Cabbage Cafe had somehow turned into an Antifa meeting, and they are out. Although, normally when you're out, you don't have to announce it; you just leave. So
what
does that even mean?
Yeah.
What does that even mean? I don't know what that means.
Because we're speaking about law enforcement in negative terms, it seems as if we want to try and defund law enforcement or whatever. I think what we're doing is we're offering a very realistic view of what happens to people when the system turns bad on them. Rob got put through hell for years and years before, and then after his period of incarceration. We're
Yeah,
exploring.
and we're
that.
talking about decades and decades of illegal cannabis in this world, and we're still fighting that tooth and nail every day. So, yeah, see you
Again.
later, whoever you are.
I don't think anybody was referring to even the police. It's bad policy. It's bad policy that put Rob in the place that he was at. I mean, come on.
There are famous cases that happened right around the same time of Rob's case, right? Where like police officers were involved in it. Like this, okay, they were like prison guards, right? And one of these guys literally killed themselves before trial. Again, another victim of poor and unjust policy. But that was really the state of what a lot of my clients feel. Like, why continue to fight and live in fear forever for something that I didn't do, something that's not wrong, something but our friends make millions of dollars on today, right now, in their neighborhoods. In fact, some of the most saturated places like Coldwater or Jackson, where there's huge in prison industrial complexes, also have huge legal cannabis fields right there, accessible, and it's super saturated out there, and that's fucking ironic. To be able to benefit from so many areas of cannabis and cannabis culture, right? To benefit from profiting from incarcerating them, and then also for selling weed in your neighborhood.
We're down to just a couple minutes left in the show here. Why don't we get a chance for you to talk a little bit about what's going on with Great Lakes Expungement Network? I think Jamie had put on the agenda that we were going to do that today, and I want our listeners to be able to hear that.
I do kind of appreciate the fact how Josey's maintained this conversation with Rob about the conditions and all this type of stuff. I thought that was really interesting. I was kind of enjoying.
Okay, I'll be quick because I do have one more question for Rob, but Rob's the shit, first and foremost. We are expunging records February 19th. DUIs bills come into effect, and we'll kind of know how those work out and how those affect how the process goes from there. We have officially expunged over 300 or applied for over 300 applications for expungement. We have a 100% success rate for all of our misdemeanor marijuana stuff. Again, misdemeanor marijuana stuff is a lot easier than these standard things. Just a reminder, please make Sons and Daughters United your your Amazon Smile charity. It gives a percentage of just any of your shopping habits back to us. Feel free to make Great Lakes Expungement Network your charity for your Facebook fundraiser or whatever. Ryan Basor did one for us, raised $1,300. So that's super cool.
And Krista Beller of Real Leaf.
$600. It's amazing. So every dollar that we raise goes directly to expunging records. So we don't have any real overcost other than paying for attorneys and paying for filing fees. So all the other interns and everyone else that works here does it for free. So please feel free to apply online at the Great Lakes Expungement Network.org. Thank you guys for having me here. I'm so excited to be in the presence of the great Rob Tuttle. I can't believe that like all this shit, and it's been 10 years. So you know what? Congratulations, Rob, on 10 years and finally being free and then being able to enjoy cannabis in the way that I think you've always envisioned it should be.
Beautiful words. Rob, do you have anything you'd like to throw out there just at the end of the show?
If anybody's getting incarcerated, I'd be able to talk to them and tell them what to expect and what to do and how to be prepared.
Well, it's really tough connection. I'm sorry about that, Rob. Thanks for being on the show today, Rob. We appreciate it.
Wait, Rob, will you tell us how we can hire you? How we can get a hold of you for your alarm systems? I know that a lot of our friends want to give back to somebody who's given so much.
No doubt.
Oh man, we had a good connection with him for a while. Maybe you can still get some before the end of the show.
Yep. Well, let's move.
Here.
You're wrong.
I'm on Facebook. If you want to send me an IM.
Rob Tuttle on Facebook.
Tuttle, Tuttle, of course.
Yep. So let's just move on. Anton, did you have any final thoughts you'd like to add on today?
Great convo as usual. There have been some really good conversations that have come out of the past few shows, and I think that bringing the awareness to the conversation and to the, as a collective, that's what's going to answer we're going to get our answers to the questions at the end of the day. So I appreciate Rob's story. I appreciate what he's done, and I hope that we get to the point to where not many people get to have the experience that he had.
Yeah, it's been rough for a lot of people, especially in Oakland County. And there's now a new prosecutor, and there's some good reports, at least, that there's a vast improvement from the previous prosecutor, Jessica Cooper. So Karen McDonald is a progressive won her election. And hopefully some of that stuff or a lot of that stuff has been slowed down or stopped. I like to believe there's some good reports from some of the lawyers who do a lot of work in that county too.
Josie, did I give you enough time to get all the stuff that you wanted to say? Did you give us a hookup for Great Lakes Expungement Network yet?
I have literally talked the entire time of this show, but yeah, Great Lakes Expungement Network.org. Please donate to us on Facebook. Also, you know what? My friend Bob and Robin Young are totally watching this. They watch every show. And I just want to remind everybody that Bob Young stood outside for like weeks at a time in Mount Pleasant collecting signatures in Ithaca and in Gratiot County, and he is literally the fucking shit. So, and also I know my friend John Slicker is watching this too. So, fuck yes, I love you guys so much. Thanks for doing this for me, Rob. Congratulations once again. You deserve all the good. Please go hire Rob. He's on Facebook, right? So.
Yes.
Jim,
And I'm good. I've done a lot of dispensaries and grows. And so I've done about 12 inspections with the states when it comes to cameras and alarms. So I'm experiencing that as well and what the inspectors look for.
Jim?
Great show. Rob, best to you on your future and everything. You got to get a support system in this industry. I want to just give a shout out to my friend that passed away last week. His name's Marty Roberts. He was a jazz drummer for 35 years out in a place called the Dresden Room in Los Angeles, California. Dresden was opened up by a guy from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan back in like the 50s. And Marty and his wife played at the same bar for about over 35 years together. Marty was a cannabis lover. And when I started going there in the mid 90s to start singing with that band, we'd go out to the back, in the back alley, and he called it his office, and we'd all sit there and smoke, all the musicians, and really made me feel at home going to that bar. And that man was such a huge part of my life out there, and his wife as well. But I just got to give a shout out to Marty Roberts, of Marty and Elaine Roberts. And if you ever saw the movie Swingers, him and his wife are in that movie, and they've been in a few others. But that's all I wanted to say at the end here. Life is short, guys. He was 89. He served a good one, but remember that. We're all lucky to wake up every day.
Mm-hmm.
And also exposed that jazz musicians sometimes use cannabis.
And they sometimes call it cabbage. So it's called Jazz Cabbage. That's
Nice.
the cafe.
We hope that. Thanks for sharing that with us, Jim. Hope that condolences to his family and other close friends and associates.
Amazing dude.
Anything final, Jamie? What do you got to say?
I think it's cool that we had this discussion with Rob. I know that Josey knows his situation, and it's just really frustrating that he's been through all that, and at the end we can't extend to him any part of this great expungement package that passed, last session, and it's just frustrating. And but but just want to let people know about him and his story and how he stood up for himself, and he financed it, and now he's back on, and he's back at it. So thanks a lot, Rob, for coming on. I'm glad people know more about your story. I mean, that whole case and all that kind of stuff has been a big part of the history, and now here's another reflection of why there's an issue with how we're trying to help people out with their records just over some cannabis, small amounts of exchange of cannabis.
Well, let me ask you, Jamie, would you please put up that comment from Boo Boo that was just on the bottom here, just for everybody that's watching.
Oh shit! I forgot. Okay, yep. Sorry.
You go right ahead, Jamie. What were you
No.
gonna say?
Okay, I'm glad that you said that. Just go ahead.
So Boo Boo writes, "What about the giant alligator?" And I just wanted to address that. There was a time when the raids first happened in 2010 in Oakland County, when the sheriff Bouchard said that one of these cannabis grows was being guarded by an alligator. And he said, this is Michigan, not a Cheech and Chong movie. It made international headlines. And then months later, it was revealed that it was about 1.5 foot long caiman that lived in a terrarium. So it was not this gigantic guard alligator at all. But that particular episode encapsulates the whole mindset that we had to deal with, that Rob Tuttle got victimized by, that my business partner, Rick Ferris, got put in jail for, that Ryan Basar went to jail for, that so many of our friends went to jail for. And unfortunately, as we talked about today, Tori and others died for. So the times that we live in now are a gift that was wrapped and paid for by a group of people that most folks forget. Jazz Cabbage Cafe, we try really hard to remember the heroes of the industry and to record forever some of the history and the words of the people that made it. And I hope you'll continue to tune in to watch Jazz Cabbage Cafe on the Roku network, or to listen to us on Pandora or Alexa, or to watch us on Facebook or YouTube, because we intend to continue to bring stories like this and stories like the wonderful work being done by our panelists that we had last week, who are actually taking cannabis donations and using them to help people get off meth and opioids and heroin. So I'm proud to be part of this broadcast, and thanks very much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Rob, for so rawly sharing what happened to you in vivid detail.
Thank you.
He's weaving in and out, but we got some good information on record from him, and appreciate it. All right,
job,
everybody.
everyone.
Yep,
Thank
Jazz Cabbage Cafe, appreciate it. We'll be back on next week.